Welcome to the Mental Health Multiverse.
We're your hosts,
HB
and LB.
We'll be breaking down some of our favorite movies and TV shows as they relate to mental health, self-healing, and overall wellness, while also breaking stigmas, shedding light on misinterpretations, and helping you understand yourself a little better.
If you're also on a healing journey and enjoy pop culture, stick around. Hello, fellow geeks, nerds, and Disney fans, and welcome back to another episode of Mental Health Multiverse, where this season we are talking about some strong, empowering Disney heroines. And today we are talking about Esmeralda, who I know technically isn't a Disney princess, capital P, anymore. She was until 2004, and then they were having a really hard time marketing her because she represents a lot of mature themes. Fun fact, anyway. But she is definitely a strong, empowering character.
Yes, and we also have a super special guest with us today. Everyone, welcome Abelle to the podcast. Yay!
Hello.
Abelle is a queer, non-binary person who's also a lifelong nerd, artist, and fan of all things spooky, which is why we get along. They're also a giant animation nerd who absolutely loves geeking out about what makes it such a unique medium for storytelling and expression. And we are so excited to have you on MHM. Fun fact about Abelle is that they were one of my first Geeknasium clients ever, which is super exciting.
So special. I love that.
It's so special. Yeah. So welcome to MHM.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is so exciting. I've somehow made it through being a millennial and both through the pandemic without making or being on a podcast until now. So this is very exciting.
We broke the seal.
Yep.
I love that. So Abelle, would you like to do the honors of giving the listeners an abridged synopsis of The Hunchback of Notre Dame?
Sure. Let's see. Attempting to keep so many things as concise as possible. We open with it's framed as in like a story that's happened in the past. There's a Romany family who is trying to escape into the city to seek sanctuary and refuge. They get interrupted by some guards, along with Judge Claude Frollo, our villain of the entire story, who is amazingly played by Tony Jay in like one of the best performances in a Disney movie to me personally. But anyway, that happens. The mother flees with her child, who Frollo mistakes for stolen goods. She tries to seek sanctuary at the Cathedral of Notre Dame. Frollo basically causes her to fall down the steps and die. He picks up what he realizes is a baby and decides it's a good idea to maybe throw this child in a well. Thankfully, gets stopped by the archdeacon coming out of the church, who's like, "No, please, maybe not," and reminds him that Frollo can tell himself that whatever he does is righteous, but he can't hide what he's doing from the eyes of God, and like literally the eyes of the cathedral staring down at him.
Such a freaky scene.
Yeah, all of the statues are suddenly turning to look at him, and it's very ominous. Right off the bat, this movie is very dark, especially for a Disney movie.
So dark.
So Frollo decides, instead of committing infanticide within the first 5 minutes of the movie, he's going to adopt this child. And by adopt, I don't mean like take him into his house. I mean put him in the cathedral and probably really let the archdeacon care for him mostly. And so Quasimodo, he names this child, which the narration tells you Quasimodo literally means half-formed. So he names this child half-formed, shuts him up in the tower for all of his life. Then fast forward like 20 years or so, we see Quasimodo has grown up into the bell ringer of Notre Dame. He's literally never left the cathedral at all. He's been taught that we explicitly find out that he's taught from Frollo the best he can expect is to like not be feared by other people, and like Frollo is doing him a kindness by doing that. And Quasimodo's never left the cathedral. He finally decides he's gonna break Frollo's orders and go out into the city of Paris on what is the Feast of Fools, which is this huge celebration where it's like, instead of following rules and everything, everyone is literally, as the song says, topsy-turvy. And a lot of the Romany people, who are usually like generally not looked well upon society, that's the time they get to like show up, and it's okay for everybody to like enjoy their performances and everything. We're briefly introduced to Phoebus, the captain of the guard, who comes in, and he sort of intervenes and not saves, but helps save our heroine Esmeralda, who shows up and after she's being accosted by some guards. Phoebus is great. I will stop here and say because he canonically likes a woman who can kick his ass. This is a very valid choice. But we're introduced to Phoebus, see that like, oh, he's maybe not as bad as the other guards. Quasimodo goes out, runs into Esmeralda at some point, who thinks his face is a mask. He's like, oh, great mask. Quasimodo gets like celebrated by everyone in the festival. He actually gets made the king of fools because again, everybody thinks his face is a mask, but he has this really great moment of like actually getting celebrated for who he is. And this thing about himself that Frollo has taught him is like actively bad and sinful is actually the best thing about him that gets him crowned the king of fools. And then one of these terrible guards in the crowd throws a tomato at him and incites the rest of the crowd to join in and publicly humiliate. And I would say basically they're torturing him in public, and Frollo just stands by and watches him because he's mad that Frollo defied his wishes. And then Esmeralda, bless her, comes out, stops the crowd from being insane, and shows Quasimodo like maybe the first kindness he's ever had in his life at this point, basically.
Though, yeah.
Frollo is pissed off that she's defying him, orders the guards to capture her. She escapes after this brilliant little like back and forth cat and mouse with the guards. She ends up seeking shelter in the cathedral. We find out Phoebus has followed her there, and he helps her claim sanctuary so that Frollo can't actually like come into the cathedral and arrest her. Esmeralda and Quasimodo meet up again because Esmeralda can't leave the cathedral if she wants to keep her sanctuary claim. Quasimodo ends up helping her escape because he definitely has like a big old crush on her, and they have this really beautiful exchange before he helps her escape where they're up on the roof and looking out at the city, and Quasimodo says how like he says something basically about how like the Romani are like terrible people and like thieves and liars and whatever, and Esmeralda's like, well, I'm one of those people, like what do you think about me? He's like, no, you're good and pure and perfect and nice or whatever. And it just took him meeting someone of this group he had been taught to like vilify his entire life for him to be like, oh, maybe you're not so bad. And after he helps her escape, literally in the song after that, he calls her an angel in his song and sings about how like her kindness to him is like heaven's light shining down on him. Mm. And then we have maybe the horniest song in Disney villain canon. I don't know if there's another one that tops it, but Frollo has like the perfect victim blaming song about how it's somehow Esmeralda's fault that he is lusting after her.
Oh my God, yeah.
And then men will start a literal witch hunt and a genocide instead of going to therapy, and that's what Frollo decides to do. And so he literally starts hunting down Esmeralda and any other of the Romani people he finds. We see him like actively hunting them down and burning their houses and things like that. In the course of that, Phoebus actually tries to protect the family and he gets injured. Esmeralda brings him back to the cathedral for Quasimodo to help. And we see that Phoebus and Esmeralda have a thing, and Quasimodo's like, you know, a little heartbroken. He reacts very well to this, actually. Like, him and Phoebus definitely have a little back and forth after this when Esmeralda's gone, and Phoebus and Quasimodo are trying to find her. But they're bickering because they're kind of just sniping with each other. It's not like, I'm mad at you because I'm friend zoned. But they end up hunting down Esmeralda in the Court of Miracles, where the other Romani people are. And unfortunately, Frollo has followed them there and rounds up Esmeralda and everyone else who's there. And then we get to the climax of the film, finally, where Frollo's really literally about to burn Esmeralda to the stake in front of the cathedral, unless I guess she agrees to like be with him in some capacity. She does not agree to do that. He sets things on fire. Quasimodo, who's been chained up in the cathedral, breaks free, like does a whole Tarzan sequence down the front of the cathedral, rescues Esmeralda. Phoebus manages to break free from where he's been captured. He and the rest of the Romani people get free, and everyone starts fighting back. Frollo manages to ascend the cathedral somehow, throws the archdeacon like down the stairs at some point. This poor old man who has done nothing wrong this whole film. And Frollo has a final confrontation with Quasimodo and ends up like really, it's so funny. The film, as much as it apparently supposedly tried to not be very religious, the end of the film is pretty explicit that Frollo went to hell. He literally
Yes.
like falls off a demonic gargoyle that comes to life and sneers at him before plunging him into the fire below him. Um, he dies. Esmeralda's okay. Phoebus is okay. Everyone makes it out of the cathedral, and they lead Quasimodo out like into the sunlight, where he's accepted by everyone who like finally sees him for the hero and the good person that he is. The end.
And scene. Roll credits. It's such a happier ending than the book for sure. But thank you so much
Yeah.
for that synopsis. So for people who haven't seen the movie, there you go. You can probably, I mean, depending on how you, I don't know, your preferences, what you like in movies, go ahead and watch it. Otherwise, if this is one that you're like, nope, not a fan, I don't blame you. And you
Yeah.
have
Or if you
Abelle's
just
beautiful synopsis.
yeah, or if you just haven't seen it in a while, like you know, that's that was the case for me when we rewatched it the other night. I like had not seen it since childhood, and when we rewatched it, I was like, this is the darkest movie. This is the darkest Disney movie.
Yeah.
It must be the darkest Disney movie. Like besides the first 5 minutes of Bambi, like this is the darkest Disney
Yeah.
movie.
I
Yeah, I think
truly
rewatching it for this, I also like this might be the first time I'd seen it as an adult. So
oh.
I remembered it being dark, and then rewatching it, I was like, how does this have a G rating?
Right?
How?
That's what,
How?
yeah.
Right? Yeah, so
I no
speaking
clue.
of, it came out in June of 1996. So Abel and I, we were both 6 because I think we're the same age, right?
Yep.
So we were both 6, and LB, who is much younger than us, was a baby, was just born fresh out of the womb, right?
Like, yeah, pretty much. I was 8 months old.
Okay.
Okay.
An 8-month-old little baby. So
Little baby. So yeah, I did not see it in theaters. I probably didn't see it until it came out on VHS. I
I
know I watched
honestly,
it as a kid, but
this might have been one of the first movies I saw in theaters because like I have a very vague
whoa.
memory of seeing some parts of this like on a screen in a theater at some point. I feel like I remember because specifically because my mom and I were late. That's why I remember it.
And have you watched the movie? So you watched it in theaters. Did you watch it as a kid often or like
Probably it was definitely somewhere. I'm sure in a box it still exists as a VHS with a bunch of other Disney movies that I had as a child. And yeah, it was always I think one of my favorites. So it's definitely probably one I rewatched not infrequently as a child when you know you have a favorite thing. You're like, I'm gonna watch this so many times until my
yes.
parents probably cannot stand it anymore.
well, that's one of the reasons I asked you onto the podcast, because when I posted that LB and I were watching this, you were like, this is one of my favorite Disney movies. And I was like, well, we just watched it and we both felt like we needed to take a shower. So
Truly.
maybe you would be a good guest to have on because you actually liked it.
Yep. And it's funny because I knew it had always been one of my favorite movies, but like until you asked me about like being on the podcast about it, I hadn't really sat and thought about why is this one of my favorite movies? Because like I know I like spooky stuff, and it's definitely got like obviously one of the darker Disney movies, but why else did I like this? And so I started listening to the soundtrack throughout the day, and as I was doing it, I was like, oh, I liked this as a kid because it helped me deal with my like religious baggage that I was dealing with growing up.
Whoa.
Um,
Okay.
so for some backstory, I grew up in a very small town in a very conservative area in southern South Georgia in the United States. And the entire 13 or 14 years I lived there, I knew of one person aside from myself who was not religious at all. I basically always grew up non-religious. The one other person I knew was like a high school teacher I had the 1 year of high school I attended there. But so I was always very aware that I was the only non-religious person I knew. Everyone around me was also aware of that, and I was very aware that everyone around me was aware of that. And so as a kid, and to be very clear, I am aware that this is not all Christians or anything like that. Okay, the main thing here seems to be like love thy neighbor, and like Jesus specifically loved like the outcasts and like the poor and the downtrodden and all that, and like God is love. And then I would see people, including my own family, who claim to profess that, say and do the most heinous shit when it came to anybody who was different than them in any way, be it race or sexual orientation or even just like a different Christian denomination. And as a kid, I was like, I don't understand how these two things are coexisting. And like, not just were coexisting, but like weren't even acknowledged. There was just no awareness even of like the way I am living my life is not matching what I am saying I believe so much every day I go to church. And on top of that, I guess being outside of that, I was kind of more hyper aware of when abuses of that happened, like when someone in a position of power like abuse that power over someone, particularly in a religious situation. And thinking of it that way, this movie was absolutely the first time that I saw a character in media who was explicitly abusing their power over people, but explicitly using religion to abuse their power over people. And in such a hypocritical way. And not only was it acknowledged by the movie, it was explicitly condemned by the movie. Because I know in the original book, Frollo is actually an archdeacon and not a judge. And that was one of the things they changed for the movie to try and make it less overtly religious, apparently. But I don't know how much of an effect it had overall. But even though he's a judge in the movie, like he's still very clearly a self-described holy man. Like he justifies what he's doing as like the will of God. But then he's arguably like the most sinful person in the entire movie. And the end of the movie, like he's holding on to this gargoyle that turns into like a very demonic face and plunges him into fire. The movie very explicitly says, okay, this asshole went to hell.
Yeah.
And that was absolutely for me the first time in any media I saw something like that. And then also I think, I know I very strongly identified with Esmeralda and specifically her song that she has, because she's specifically singing about like, she's an outcast. She's like, it sounds like from what she says in the beginning, she's a non-believer, doesn't even know if she's allowed to talk to God or whatever, but she's asking him to intervene on behalf of like those who have less for her. She literally doesn't want to ask for anything because she can get by with what she has, but she wants these other people to get taken care of because they're not. And she's surrounded by like the other people in the church who are all like dressed up fancy and obviously like have money and wealth already, but they're asking for more. And then you have Esmeralda who's over here asking for like literally nothing for herself. And she's like, again, acknowledging that disparity between these people who are clearly religious and following their path and everything, but it's in like a very self-serving, hypocritical type of way. And it was just the first time I absolutely would have seen something like that in media, and was looking back as an adult, I was like, oh, okay, this is making sense for me in a way like the world around me isn't. Because this movie is acknowledging a thing that I'm like, am I the only one paying? What's wrong here? What's going on? And it was a way to like see myself and that confusion I was having within my own experiences actually be depicted and understood in a way.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I'm so glad that it gave that to you, you know?
Yeah, and I didn't even realize it until literally this week watching the movie as an adult and being like, oh no, I understand now. I understand.
And I think that's such a beautiful thing. And I know you're like an animation nerd and super animation. And I know that like animation gets not a bad rap, but there's like this idea or stigma that like animation is only for kids, right?
Yeah.
But like we just talked about Rapunzel last episode, and that like really hit hard for me because I had a very like covertly abusive mom, and that was the first time in my life I had seen any kind of media, especially a Disney movie that like addressed that, right? And then I related. I realized it when we were watching the movie, but I also have like a lot of religious trauma, and hearing you talk about that, I can also like relate. And I think that's a beautiful thing about animation and movies, and even if they are Disney movies, that like it's, I don't want to say always a safe and easy way, but sometimes it is like a safe and easy way to even just like have something to point to kind of like address like, oh, this puts into words things that I haven't yet been able to quite understand or process, but like I have this thing now that I can look to. And I think that's
Yeah.
really, especially for children. Like, even though animation is not exclusively for children, obviously, hello, Disney adults here, but I do think it helps open the door for these conversations to happen.
For sure. It's at the very least like a way to see that you're not alone in your experience, whatever that may be, and to be like, oh, I'm not the only one person thinking this. I'm not crazy. Other people are thinking about this enough to make it a thing in a movie. So I'm not alone in that.
Exactly. And that's exactly what, nice segue into what we're doing here in this podcast, is to help people feel seen and heard and less alone in their experience. And using strong, empowering Disney heroines to address that. So thanks for that nice little segue there. HB, what was your experience with the movie? I know you said you were 6 when it came out. Did you watch it in theaters?
I don't think so. I'd have to ask my mom. I don't remember. So, sometimes, 6 was young. So I'm like, I don't know. But I was apparently obsessed with Esmeralda, which again, I don't necessarily remember. But like, according to my mom, I was so obsessed with her that she actually handmade me a costume to wear one year for Halloween so that I could be Esmeralda. I think I loved her because I keep talking about how I just like project myself on different Disney princesses because there was not one singular one that like represented me, what I looked like, all of that. But with Esmeralda specifically, like being a mixed race, I was also like darker skinned when I was younger. I don't know what happened to me when I got older, but I am like, my dad is half black, so I do have like, I am of mixed race, and so I was like darker when I was younger. So I feel like it was the curly dark hair, the darker skin, and the light green eyes, because you can't really tell, but I have green eyes, everyone.
Very pretty
so
eyes.
like, thank you. But yeah, so like I think I loved her because of that, like because we do have similar features. Again, like we might be from different backgrounds, of course, but I really think that I saw myself in her when I was younger. So I think that's why I really liked her. Also, we'll get into lists of why we liked Esmeralda in a second. I don't remember. You know what I mean? It's like I can't.
Yeah.
My mom was telling me this, how obsessed I was with her. So it's like I don't personally remember watching the movie as a kid and being obsessed. Like that's not a personal memory I have, but from what my mom was telling me, and like just like knowing that, like, oh yeah, I know that I liked her, but don't have the memory of it, right? But I do have a fun fact about that year that my mom made me the Esmeralda costume. And this is again a fun fact I got from my mom. Did not remember it. But
shout out to Mama Bodhi.
Yeah, shout out to Mama Bodhi. We'll call her RB. RB. She was upset because she handmade me that costume, but there are no pictures of me dressed as Esmeralda that year because I actually was sick that Halloween. So
Oh, no.
I don't even think I don't know that I went trick-or-treating, or maybe I went to a couple houses before they were like, oh, you have a fever, we're taking you home, you're going to bed. So my mom is very upset that there are no photos of me, but I'm kind of like, maybe it's a good thing that there aren't pictures of me dressed as Esmeralda for Halloween. Like, just like get that out there. Maybe that's a good thing. But there are many photos of me dressed as Pocahontas as a child. So there's that. Yeah. But yeah, so Esmeralda is one we don't have photographic evidence of, but my mom is very upset because she made me that costume. But yeah, I had that apparent obsession with Esmeralda, but I don't think Hunchback of Notre Dame was really in my rotation that much, because when we rewatched it, I remembered almost nothing. I was like,
right.
this was one of my favorite movies as a child. Like
this was meant for children.
Yeah. So I think it was just one of those movies that I watched and became obsessed with the idea of, but didn't necessarily come back to. And I think I understand, like upon rewatch, I think I understand why. I think little Heather was like, yes, we like this. And then,
but also,
like, we don't need to revisit it.
Right.
Exactly.
True.
Yeah.
True. Fair. Very fair.
But yeah, before we get into like, so I know we've already discussed some themes with our first experiences and things like that, but there is kind of like an elephant in the room that some listeners may or may not be aware of. So throughout the entire movie Hunchback of Notre Dame, there is a racial slur that is used. And I'm flabbergasted that Disney got away with using it for an
So
entire
many
movie.
times. They say it
Yeah.
so many times.
They
I
say it's like,
literally started like taking a tally mark count of how many times it was used in the movie, and then I made it like 20 minutes in, and I was like, I'm gonna be too depressed if I keep doing it.
yeah.
Like,
How many did you get up to?
Um, it was like over 10.
Okay. All right.
yeah.
Yeah, no. It's what Froyo it's what everyone uses to refer to
Everybody.
the Romani people. So like that's
Mhm.
just but anyway, so we're obviously not going to use that slur on this podcast to
Mhm.
refer to the Romani people. So Abelle, can you share where this term came from and who it's referring to?
Yeah. So the G slur derives from the word Egyptian due to the misconception that the Romani people who started immigrating into Great Britain came from Egypt instead of the country of India, where they were actually from. So it literally was like the exact same thing as what happened when Columbus came to North
Mhm.
America, saw some brown people, and was like, "You're Indians. That's what you are." It's the exact same thing. And then it eventually became pared down into a slur. It's also, like we mentioned earlier, where the term gypped comes from. Also, not the best thing. And I did a little bit of research because I honestly am not very familiar with like the specifics of anything dealing with the Romani people at all. But according to the European Roma Rights Center online, they are Europe's largest minority group with an estimated 10 to 12 million people. And like Europe's Jewish population, they were also a major target of the Holocaust by the Nazis. The total number of victims, like in a lot of cases, then they don't know the full extent, but it's estimated that about 25 to 50% of Europe's entire Roma population was murdered during the Holocaust. And it's still, in a lot of places in modern Europe, it's still structurally anti-Roma racism is still pretty common, um, and apparently like up to as much as 80% of the population lives at risk of poverty today. So again, another group that's been like systematically over decades, if not centuries, has been consistently oppressed. And yeah, the G slur is just one of those words that it's so ubiquitous in our language. It's just like, this is just a thing you say. I didn't know it was a thing until like a couple years ago, maybe. And I was like, oh, wow. No, we use that in so many ways everywhere. Like it's still used in like so many songs and album titles and things like
Mhm.
that. Like it's one of those things where like once you realize it, you start noticing in more places and you're like, how are we still doing this? What's happening?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for that
Oh,
information and kind of history and stuff. I think it's, as much as we've said this on a couple of episodes, but as much as we love talking about like the fun, happy things of these movies, I think it's really important to address nuances so that when we know better, we can do better and move
Mhm.
forward. Um,
Yeah, it
just
makes me question if there were any. I need to actually. I didn't look at the credits, and not that you can just know from names, but it makes me question if there were actually any Roma people involved in the production at all.
there were not. I did
Oh,
that
good,
research. There were not.
cool.
mm,
That makes sense then. Which
Unlike,
is,
yeah, because I found an article actually, which we can put in the show notes, but I found an article that kind of compares the or no, it's not an article, it's a YouTube video that I found from someone who did research because they are of Romani descent and they
mhm.
wanted to sort of like put together an informational video. So I'll link that. It's a really great informational video, by the way. It goes into a lot more detail of what Abel just sort of explained to all of us, but the video explains that so Pocahontas, which came out the year before Hunchback,
mm,
actually, as problematic as Pocahontas is, there were a lot of Native people involved in the project,
Mhm.
and specifically of the Powhatan Native tribe. But they have since sort of like redacted and said like we really wish we didn't
totally.
do that.
Right.
Mm,
Whereas the very next year, or maybe because they spent so much research on Pocahontas, I don't know. The very next year, they do this movie about racism against the Romani people,
Mhm.
and no Roma descent
And
Like,
It's very much like
yeah.
one step forward, three steps back kind of a thing.
yeah, and it's
Yeah.
extra wild to me knowing that like before the production even began, like they flew the directors and writers and some other people involved in pre-production like to France
Oh.
for 10 days to like tour the cathedral and look at things. I know the animators like were able to go and draw the cathedral on scene to like get all the details and everything down.
Mm.
So it's just so wild that they could have spent so much time on things like that, but then at no point, I guess, apparently have been like, maybe we should involve any of these people we're depicting in this movie. Nope, that's not a thing. Okay.
Hmm.
I think that's one of the biggest nuances of the film is that like it is a film about racism, right? It is a film about like we should treat all people equally, and these like we should like just because you are different doesn't mean we should treat you differently. And yet the actual production didn't represent that, which I just think is bonkers.
Another
So
thing I think this is again going maybe this is going too hard too fast, but on that similar vein, a thing I didn't really notice until watching through this time is that both of Quasimodo's parents are very dark-skinned, dark-featured Romani, and so are like
Yeah.
all of the rest of the people that we see. And
Mhm.
Quasimodo is white.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
Why
was my
is he
biggest
the one
confusion.
white
Yeah.
passing Romani person apparently? in
HB
the entire
literally
movie?
like while we were watching it, she was like, why is he white? But and I'm not like trying to make excuses or anything. I was saying, you know, I don't remember what the skin condition is called when like you have different shades of skin or something, and I thought maybe it's supposed to go along with like his, for lack of a better word, deformity, but also like not probably the best choice in
Yeah,
terms of age
especially
It's just
difference.
considering you don't see any variation in like the
Exactly.
skin
Yeah.
and hair color of any of the other Roma people.
Exactly.
yeah, I was genuinely confused. I was like, so wait, weren't his parents Romani like that? I'm at the end, I was just like, big question mark over my face. I was like, question mark eyes. It's odd. It was an odd. It's an odd choice. I think it's an odd choice that they made him very very white passing or white or just white. I don't know.
It's an odd choice, but I also think given the times and everything, it
Yeah.
does feel intentional, you know, also.
No. Oh,
Yeah.
I absolutely think it
Yeah.
was intentional. Yeah, they were like, oh, we've already, I think Pocahontas was Disney's first woman of color heroine. And so Esmeralda was the second. And so
Yeah.
I think, we can't follow up the movie with a brown heroine with another non-white person, you guys,
Apparently. Yeah.
Apparently. Speaking of Esmeralda,
Yeah, shifting gears just a little bit.
a wee bit. Abelle, what's your favorite thing about Esmeralda, or your favorite things?
My favorite thing about her is probably how, despite how the way that she's introduced in like her main little dance performance on stage, where we see like she definitely uses her feminine wiles to her advantage. Her biggest strength is actually her empathy. Like she is the one who she's the only person who goes to help Quasimodo when he's being tortured in front of this crowd. Her whole solo song is her just like wanting more for other people, nothing for herself. She is fine. She wants more for other people. And I think it's a similar thing with Quasimodo, but particularly with Esmeralda, like she absolutely could have been a much flatter character if they leaned more into like the sexualization of her and made her like lean into that too much. But because like her biggest strength is really just her kindness, and I think that's not something you often see depicted as a strength necessarily.
Totally.
And so I love that we get to see that with her.
Yeah, they could have just made her a damsel in distress, but they didn't. And I think that's why I really like her too. She's I made the same note that she's very empathetic, very, very kind. She's also very fair in terms of justice. Like my favorite quote, and we usually do favorites at the end, but I'll just say it now. My favorite quote in the entire movie is her quote saying, "You mistreat this poor boy the same way you mistreat my people. You speak of justice, yet you were cruel to those most in need of your help." And I'm like, we should just like blast that on every billboard, put it on every like bus or something. I don't know. Just like have that on repeat everywhere you look, because it's so I get chills. I'm like, Yeah, it's so good. She's also so in that same vein, she's so defiant. I think she's very much like a disruptor, a rebel, and she's not afraid to stand up for the people who can't stand up for themselves. I think she's also very clever, and very, very funny. She's a natural leader. And I also do love the juxtaposition, excuse me, of Esmeralda asking God for nothing for herself, but to help the people she loves. And then, throughout the song, we see other people just wanting things for them, their success, their happiness, their wealth, their health, whatever. And she's like, I literally want nothing, but can you just like, whatever graces you want to give me, give it to other people? And I'm like, also that song. I have so many thoughts and notes on that song, but we'll get to that in the bonus stuff on Patreon. So little plug there. Anyway, HB, what about you? I know you talked about your personal experience as a child, but rewatching it and seeing her now, what are your thoughts?
I don't know that I picked up on all of this as a kid. Again, no clear memory, but like everything that y'all just said, like she's just so strong, which I obviously I gravitate towards strong female characters, right? Like she represents so much strength in different ways. Like she is physically strong, and I think that is representing like how hard she has had to fight her whole life to just like get by and survive. She saves Phoebus twice, not once, but twice. So, there's all this like, she's the one who needs saving at the very beginning and at the very end, but like she does just as much saving of the other people too. Which I think is like I think there's just like a passing of the torch of like who is the Disney princess in this movie? Like, is it Phoebus? Is it Quasimodo? Is it Esmeralda? Like, which one needs saving?
Yeah, everybody who saves someone is saved by the same person in turn at some point, I think.
Yeah.
I never realized that until now. That's beautiful.
It's like full circle saving. Good job, Disney. But yeah, like going off of what y'all were saying about like her empathy and her kindness and how smart she is, and she's just like, it's all of those things, and she really is just out here trying to protect her people. She's out here, it's not even in like like, I'm not protecting myself, I'm protecting my people, which I think is just like it's just so beautiful, and you don't see that too much. I feel like a lot of times um well, I don't know. We've been watching Disney movies where it's a little bit more like this is a hero's journey, this is my hero's journey, right? And it's something that I have to go through in order to become a better person. But like Esmeralda's already gone. It feels like she's past the hero's journey in this movie. She is already the hero, and it's like obviously it's Hunchback of Notre Dame, it's Quasimodo's story. It's his story, so it's not about her journey, but like what we see, I think, is the other side of her journey. So she's already where she needs to be. I think she's the strongest character out of the three main characters already.
Totally.
Like she knows what she wants. She knows how to get it. And like the others are who have this like journey to go to, which I just feel like is kind of poetic in a way. It's like, she's already gone through the hard stuff. We don't need to see her change, or we don't need to see her have this like moment of clarity. Like she's clear from the beginning to end. I like that a lot.
Yeah, and I really like how by the end everyone is still the same. Quasimodo and Esmeralda and Phoebus are still very noble, very kind, very empathetic, very courageous. It wasn't like I had to go through this journey to become that. I had to face all these hardships and in order for me to come out on the other side better. Like they are still the same. And I think, and this is like reading way too much into it, because I'm not always a fan of, those cliches that are like, or even like touching on religious trauma a little bit, the idea that like you have to suffer in order to become stronger. I don't love that. And I like how that is not a message of this movie. And there are a lot of other messages, but that's not one, and I actually kind of appreciate that.
Yeah, really the only thing that changes with the main characters is Quasimodo's perception of himself and understanding that like everything he was taught that is bad about himself is okay. And not only that, it's good. And people should love and accept it for who he is instead of this awful environment he's been raised in that was like, nope, hate yourself, hate everybody who's different than you also, just hate everything but what I tell you.
And that there are people out there who will love and accept you for who you are, not for who they wish you were or want you to be or hope you become. But there are people out there who love you for you, and that's how you know that they're your people. And there's a really beautiful theme, I think, of belonging. Yeah. And I think going back to HB, what you were saying, we didn't write this down, but there's definitely a theme of love, both in terms of like genuine loving love, and then like using manipulation to garner this sense of love, right? And I think we talked a lot about this with Rapunzel too, how she, well, maybe we didn't talk about it. Well, toward the end, when Mother Gothel, is falling from the tower, Rapunzel reaches out for her, and you can see that Rapunzel did love Mother Gothel, and she did see Mother Gothel as like a mother, caregiver, caretaker figure. And in the same way, we see Quasimodo reaching out for Frollo, and that there was definitely some love there, even if it was built upon like a power play sort of a hierarchical thing. And I think it's cool that we get to see like the duality of love and touching on how like what love can look like and how sometimes we are told love may look like, but that I don't want to call it the good love, but I can't think of like a better word for it, that is like out there for you, and that your idea of love can change, and that what you were told, or like the love you were told that you deserve, which sometimes we hear is you don't deserve any of it, is not always true, and that there are people out there who, like I said, will love and accept you for who you are. And I think that's just after we watched the movie, I was like, this movie was rough, but now that we're talking about it, I have a deeper appreciation for it. So thank you, Abel, for your insight, because
yeah, and I think like talking about the sense of belonging and not even like necessarily romantic but platonic love as a theme. Like I think also the idea of found family was another reason that like this appealed to me a lot, because Esmeralda's people are the outcasts, whoever that is. Like before she saved Quasimodo in the middle of that crowd, she had seen that boy once before when he accidentally fell into her tent, and then she sees an injustice being done to him, and she immediately risks her life for this complete stranger because she says, this is one of my people. It doesn't matter that we're like not blood related or whatever, but he clearly is on my same level in some way, so he's one of me. I'm going to protect him.
Oh my gosh. Also, you brought up that scene where he falls into her tent. She's immediately kind to him in that scene as well. And I was like, so shocked, because I was like, if a man fell into my tent while I was changing, I would not be that kind. Yeah. And she was like, oh my gosh, are you okay? Like, I was like, okay, Esmeralda. And then something that LB noted when we were watching that I also want to bring up is like when she goes up onto that stage while the chaos is happening, like everyone's throwing like food at him and screaming, and all she does is get up there and I don't even think she says anything, right? Like it just all stops.
Yeah.
The power that woman has to just
and
be
talking
like,
about, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
No, just like going back to like how courageous she is, because like not only would like anybody doing that be an act of courage, but this is a woman from a marginalized group, a woman of color who is getting up in a sea of mostly white people who she knows like hate her and her people on every other day of the year but this year, and she still gets up to save this stranger. Whew, she's amazing.
Yeah, definitely. I think some of the other themes we've noted that we haven't quite talked about yet, or that we have touched on but haven't gone too in depth yet, one of the notes we have here is like lust and jealousy. Yuck. The only note I have on that is just yuck. I don't know if you guys have anything else to say about that.
Well, I have thoughts. I mean, we can talk more about this in the bonus episode when we talk about music and the song Hellfire. But again, like, this movie is for children? ?
Yep.
Big question mark? Many question marks?
Yeah.
I think that Froyo, I said Froyo. I think that
That's his name now. Perfect. I love it.
I just think that he is the most evil Disney villain.
Truly. Oh my God. Yeah.
But like, did I think that when I was a kid? I don't know, because I don't know that I don't know that I understood that he was plotting genocide, right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know that I knew that as a child, and I'm glad that I probably didn't know that as a child. But watching it as an adult, he's literally plotting genocide, and it's terrifying. And then this song that he has, again, we'll go more in depth in the music breakdown, but like, it's so predatory, and it's yeah. So I just remember feeling like he must be like, if we're gonna go through all of the Disney villains, he's the most evil. He wins the prize for most evil Disney villain in my book.
Truly. And I don't
think
want to say
so.
he's the most realistic, but I do think that there are a lot of people in our society and in our world who do these things under the guise of religion, God's will, divine whatever, and he's gross. I'm not a fan.
Not so much.
Later on, we'll probably talk about a lot of parallels between him and Mother Gothel in terms of like abusive caregiver. He's so much worse. He's literally scum of the earth.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's interesting that, unintentionally these movies were our like back-to-back watches, because
I know.
because of how similar, like because of those parallels. Like when we were watching, we were just messaging back and forth, like, is this Mother Gothel? Yeah, this is Mother Gothel. Oh wait, he's
They're
gross. Oh
definitely
yeah.
cousins. They're definitely
Yeah.
related. I mean, I guess we can talk about it now if that's all right. Like,
yeah.
thinking about, because Rapunzel or Tangled is fresh in my brain, and then having this like right after, even when Abelle, you were going through the synopsis, I was like, I mean, this definitely feels like Tangled trapped in a tower, can't go out. There's a celebration that she wants to attend, or they want to attend, and they break the rules and go, and then along the way, find love and things like that. But I think the main difference between Frollo and Mother Gothel is the way that they abuse, which I think is so interesting, because I think it's a very interesting parallel, but also like contrast, because Frollo is outrightly abusive, right? Like, right away from the very beginning of the movie, Frollo never cared about Quasimodo. He saw Quasimodo as like an inconvenience, a pet that he had to take care of, because otherwise he would go to hell and eternal damnation. And whatever.
His care in Quasimodo is wholly rooted in like being selfish for himself.
Yes.
Yeah, Frollo's care for Quasimodo is like wholly rooted in selfishness, because it's like a thing he thinks he has to do to make up for the sin of killing Quasimodo's mother. He wouldn't have done it if like he hadn't been guilted into it by the archdeacon, basically.
Right. Totally. And unfortunately, I think that is something far too many caregivers do. They talk about, oh, how I've provided for you. I've given you food. I've given you a roof over your head. Look at how much I've done for you. Why are you not grateful? Why are you not more, why are you not praising me for all of my hard work and what I've done? And I relate to that just a little bit, because I was told to my face that people wish I'd never been born and I was an inconvenience. So I definitely relate to that outright abuse, but I think Mother Gothel was, and also I just want to say, if you can relate to that too, and you had your basic needs kind of held over your head, I'm so sorry, and they shouldn't have done that. And I hope now you can come to a place where asking for things or having your needs met is not difficult, and you are not a burden. Thank you. Okay. So anyway, with Mother Gothel, she's definitely like more subtly abusive, and we talked a lot about that in the Rapunzel episode, so feel free to go back and listen to that. But I think an argument could be made that she did care about Rapunzel, even if it was mainly for her hair. But I do think on some level she cared for Rapunzel as a person. And the reason why it's like it could maybe possibly is just because she's not like outrightly as much as Frollo. But we did touch on this. I think it's interesting too that both Quasimodo and Rapunzel reach out to like save their abuser, and there's so much more we could say on the complexities of navigating that kind of duality of abusive relationships, whether they're from a caregiver or a significant other, a partner, or even like friendships. Yeah, there's probably so much more I can say on that, but time anyway.
Yeah, Yeah, they're both great depictions of like how hard it can be to care for someone who harms you or abuses you in some way, which can honestly make it like even harder to navigate at times.
Oh,
Um,
totally. And
yeah.
acknowledging like the grief that can come with that of,
Hmm.
accept like when we accept people for who they are and not who we wish they be, not even terms of like what we had been talking about, but even in terms of like a caregiver. I think there's so much grief that can come up about who they were and who we wish they could be, and it's important to make space for all of that because it all belongs.
Hmm.
So if you have mixed feelings about someone in your life like that, like that's totally common and totally
Hmm.
okay and understandable, and it doesn't have to be this either or. The gray
Hmm.
area is very uncomfortable, but it exists and it's allowed to exist. I think another theme that we've definitely touched on was, prejudice and racism a little bit. My only note here was about unconscious bias. Abel, you brought up the scene when they're on the roof and Quasimodo's like, but all people of this population are evil because Frollo planted these ideas mainly to keep to keep Quasimodo trapped in the tower, but also projecting his fears and whatever into Quasimodo's mind. And I think it's really interesting because unconscious bias means that our brain naturally gravitates toward generalizations because it's easier to process and make sense of the world. So for Quasimodo, and this is also just like something he's heard over and over and over again. And so I also love that Esmeralda is this disruptor, and that I love that when he says that, she probably did feel a little, offended. However, she responds with so much grace and kindness and compassion because she sees that like he doesn't truly believe that. It's just something he was told to believe.
Hmm.
And I think it's just there's so many layers now I'm seeing to this movie, and it's actually addressed so well. And I'm not going to say I'm a fan of the movie, but I am a fan of the storytelling and the way these messages are handled.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, Quasimodo is like every child who grew up in like a hyper sheltered, hyper conservative environment who is just parroting
Mhm.
the same hateful things they've been taught their whole life. And then they meet people who are a little different than them and they're like, oh, no, you're actually just like a regular person. Like maybe
Yeah.
all of this stuff I was taught is wrong. Okay.
Yep. I can relate.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I wonder if I don't know if you've seen, I talk about the sequels all the time in these in these episodes. Have you watched the sequel? I haven't seen it since I was a kid.
Probably not since it came out. I'm sure
Okay.
I was similarly obsessed with it probably when it came out, but I haven't seen it since.
I just remember that
Same.
Quasimodo finds love,
Hmm.
finally, thank goodness. But I don't remember if they ever address him like finding out about his heritage or like post all of
I
that trauma.
think so. I felt like didn't I feel like he just stays in the bell tower and just still kind of vibes there. I don't know if there's any actual addressing of it. He just stays there with his gargoyle buddy.
I mean, but listen, he loved those bells so much. He
He
loved those
did.
bells
It
so
was very
much.
sweet. It was very
He
sweet.
named
He was
That
them.
like
was a
Oh
part
my
naming
of the
them.
gosh.
movie. That part of the movie made me cry when he's introducing Esmeralda to the bells and he's like, and this one is so and so, and these two are twins. And I'm like,
I love
he
you.
loves
You're
the
so
bells.
good. You're so
Oh,
They're
good.
so pure. So
so
And
pure.
his whole
so
little
pure.
model that he's built of the town square in front of the cathedral and all the little people he's made, my heart explodes all the time.
Yeah, I messaged LB and I was like, I want a little wooden carving of Esmeralda. I want it to be just
Right?
like the one that he makes in the movie. It's
Mhm.
so
Oh,
cute.
it is
And then
Mhm.
of
so
course
cute.
Frollo burns it.
What a jackass,
I hate
honestly.
him so much.
I think another theme would be like we've already talked about religion, faith, whether that be like blind faith in someone or something, or being overly pious and pretentious about your belief system.
Mhm.
Go ahead, HB.
I just think it's interesting, again, more like nuance and juxtaposition in this movie is that it's like really political while also being religious, which I'm like,
Mhm.
Mhm.
which one are we doing? Like, and I get that they can
Where's the
both
separation
exist.
of church and state?
Well, that's what I'm saying. I get that they can both exist at the same time, but I just think it's fascinating that it is like a lot of the songs allude to religion, like a lot of the
Yeah.
like the story takes place in a church. Like it makes sense that it is
Mhm.
religious, but it is also incredibly political. And so I'm like, it's just fascinating to me that it does both at the same time, you know?
Mhm.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
there's a lot more commentary we can say on the realities of that in today's times, but I don't know if we
Mhm.
have time for that today, but maybe if we do a part two.
Yeah.
And the last theme I wrote down that we touched on is definitely belonging. You know, both Quasimodo and Esmeralda have a desire to be accepted by the world, even though they're told that they're less than people or that they're not good enough. And I love that both of them have this journey of looking within to kind of cut
Mhm.
that chatter, both internal and external, and reconnect to their inner innate worth. And I mean, I think Esmeralda from the very beginning never really let that she was very unbothered by all of that.
Mhm.
Like, I mean, she, you know, was very upset and disappointed that she and her people are treated this way. But like I said, she's also very defiant, and when the guards at the beginning, like the first scene when we meet her and the guards are trying to like arrest her or whatever, she takes it so, I don't know, she's just very witty and funny, and because she knows that she can best them and she knows that she can get away,
Mhm.
and she's like, whatever.
Yep.
Yeah, she's a
Yep.
realist about like the situation she's in, while at the same time being an optimist in like how she chooses to defy the situation and the
Yes,
systems that she's in.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And like we touched on, I think there is something so special or beautiful about Quasimodo finding acceptance from people who are considered outcasts or whatever, you know, being called hideous and ugly by onlookers, but then Clopin reframes it as like a good thing, and he's like accepted even if it is for a brief moment in time. But I do think that takeaway there could be that, like I said before, people who are meant to be your people will fully accept you for who you are, and they're not going to ask you to change.
Mhm.
And I think that's kind of special. And then my last note on belonging is just that I really, really love at the end that it's a child who takes the first step toward him and accepts him and like holds his
Mhm.
hand. And I think it's just a beautiful way of highlighting how like we aren't born with these prejudices or even like
Mhm.
limiting beliefs or self-limiting beliefs, that like these are things we learn over time from our environment and from the people around us. And I think that's just another note on like inner child work and healing and reconnecting with that, the innate wonder and joy and just being like in the openness. I think being open to all ideas, walks of life, beliefs without judgment, and you know, just using curiosity and compassion as the compass for moving through life. And I think we can learn a lot from children. So I really love that scene.
Mhm.
I love that note. It's only like a 2-second thing, but and I'm probably reading
Mhm.
as I go way too much into it, but I just I love it.
No,
Mhm.
it's that's a very touching part of the movie. Another part where I got teary-eyed for sure.
Mhm. And I think like similar to Esmeralda, Quasimodo's real strength is also his kindness and his empathy. Because
Yeah.
like the way that
Yeah.
he was raised by Frollo, he absolutely could have turned out into like Frollo Jr. and just absolutely believing the same things. But because he had this little window to the world where he got to actually see other people, even from like stories and stories below, he saw that that wasn't the case, and he still like had this innate empathy and curiosity and kindness for other people within him that still managed to not get squashed out of him as hard as Frollo tried. He couldn't do it.
Totally. And I think that's
Yeah.
another very realistic depiction of people wanting to break the cycle and not wanting to continue that kind of harm to
Mm-hmm.
others because they know how painful it is, and so they want to try and do better.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and he could have really turned out to be a monster, right? Because at the
Mm-hmm.
very beginning, the first line is like, this is a story about a man and a monster. Frollo is trying to make out that Quasimodo is the monster the whole time. It's very clear which one of them is the actual
Right.
monster. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but like, had he taken on the qualities, had Quasimodo taken on those qualities of how he was raised, like he could have really been a monster, but he
Mm-hmm.
wasn't.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and he actively refutes that in the final confrontation he and Frollo have at the end before Frollo falls into the lava or the molten metal that's been poured off the cathedral.
Yeah.
But like Quasimodo explicitly tells him, like, you've told me all my life that like the world was a scary, cruel place, but the only thing cruel is you. And he actively like
Boom.
throws that back in Frollo's face.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Definitely got strong Rapunzel vibes of, you
Yes.
know, you're wrong. What was the line? You're wrong about the world and you're wrong about me. And I'm like, yeah, fuck yeah. Mm.
Yes.
So good. So good.
Mhm.
So I didn't love the ending of this movie, and it's going to sound very contradictory to previous podcast episodes that we've recorded where I have sound very jaded and like I hate love. Because I'm not jaded. I don't hate love. I just sometimes hate how it happens in Disney movies, where I feel the complete opposite about this one. I really wanted Esmeralda and Quasimodo to be in love. And so when she's in love with Phoebus, which I get because first of all, Phoebus is like societally more attractive. Second of all, um, one thing that I do love about Phoebus, that we haven't really talked about him much, but he kind of he's like an example of a really great white ally. Like
Mhm.
he uses his
Mm.
privilege to help a lot, which I think is really great. And not something that you see a lot in media. So
Right.
he's
It's
like
usually like white saviorism, not white allyship.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
exactly. Which is also why I think it's great that there's that equal share of who saves who, right?
Mhm.
Because he definitely like uses his privilege in a way that benefits Esmeralda, and it's not in this like I expect anything in return or anything like that. So I will note that I do really like that about him as a character. And the
Mhm.
other thing I really liked was that like when they do find where her people are staying, and she goes to give Phoebus a hug first and thanks him for coming, he's like, "Oh, it was actually my little buddy's plan. This was Quasimodo's idea all along." And I was
Yeah.
like,
Yeah, they avoid having like the usual gross, annoying love triangle stereotypes where like people are sniping back and forth of each other. It's like there's a little bit of
Yes.
that with Quasi and Phoebus at first, but then they quickly get over it because they're like, we gotta go save our friend.
But also, can we note
Exactly.
too that like the banter between Esmeralda and Phoebus is very typical Disney, but then also the banter between Quasimodo and Phoebus is very typical Disney romantic
Listen,
relationship. So I ship a
there was
throuple.
there was opportunity for a queer relationship here. And I would have been a-okay if just all three of them would have decided to ride off in the sunset together.
Totally. Yeah. I ship it. I ship it.
I ship it as well.
Polycule of Notre Dame. Great. That's what it's become.
I'm okay with that.
There's
Modernize
enough room in
this.
that cathedral. They can all move in. It's fine.
Right? Exactly.
It's when Esmeralda first sees it, she's like, "Wow, you have so much space up here."
There you go. She's already planning. It's set.
There you go. She's nesting. Yeah.
However, so I think the problem with this movie and the reason that I hated the end of it specifically is because looking at it through the lens of body image and the fact that it is about this person who is quote unquote disfigured, right?
Yeah.
I think that there is a message that it sends, whether consciously, subconsciously, whatever, that is if you are not in a societally accepted body, you will not find love.
Find love. Yeah. Yeah.
And I hate that was my first thought. I don't hate that that's my first thought. I'm going to take that back. But I also think
You
that
just hate that it's a message or a thought that
thank you.
even
Yes.
exists. Yeah. I got you.
That's exactly what I mean. Yeah, it upsets me that is even a message that comes up at the end. And I know that I'm not alone because when I was talking to I use my children that I babysit to sort of like get information for this podcast too. Like I need your perspective. And funny enough, they had watched Hunchback of Notre Dame relatively recently without me asking them to, because sometimes I'll be like, you guys should watch this weekend so we can talk about it next week. And they're like, yeah, sure, let's do it. But they had already watched Hunchback of Notre Dame recently. And I was talking to them about, well, the little boy specifically, he's 7. And I was like, it's really dark, right? And he was like, well, what do you mean by dark? And I was like, so it's kind of scary and really mean. And I kind of explained to him like what dark means. He was like, yeah, you're right. And he's kind of traumatized by the way that Frollo dies because he called it lava. He was like, doesn't he fall into like a pit of lava? And I'm like, yeah, basically.
Basically.
And then I was like, so I asked, I was like, what kind of messages did you like get from this movie? And of course I was like trying to get specific answers out of him because is 7, so he doesn't like think about it that way, right? Like he's 1 year older than I was the first time I saw it, and I didn't pick up on any of this. So like, but one thing I asked about was like Esmeralda's love interest, like who would he have preferred Esmeralda fell in love with? And he was like, well, I do think that because at the end Quasimodo ends up alone, that it just means that like people like him, it's going to be harder for them to find love.
Oh.
And I was like, exactly. That's exactly what I wanted you to say. Like, but it makes sense that that's like something that he picked up on, right? Because like it is, and it's also not untrue that it is harder for, you know, but there's just like such like an ableist message that it's sending.
And I think on the flip side, it's sending the message that like when you are looking for a partner or whatever, that people who look this way, like swipe left, right? that kind of a thing.
Yeah, on the flip side, it is sort of saying that, right?
Yeah.
Like it's teaching you what to look out for. Whereas like in one way, there's this message of like Quasimodo is a great human being. He's worthy. He's found
Don't judge
these
a book
great
by its
people.
cover.
Yeah. And then on the other side, it's like, but just kidding, Esmeralda's going to fall in love with the handsome guy, the traditionally societally acceptedly handsome guy, right? So I think it's like mixed messaging in a way. And
again,
I did
giant question mark.
Yeah, I don't love that.
It's the same sort of thing with like where it's reinforcing the same thing it's critiquing, where like we saw with the movie is anti-racist, but then also uses a racist slur and maybe whitewashed Quasimodo depending on his parentage. But then also like the movie, like clearly it makes it clear that like the stuff Frollo is telling Quasimodo about himself, that he's like hideous and deformed and ugly, like those are bad things to tell people. But then also Quasimodo is not going to end up with the hot lady because of course he's not.
Yeah. I just wish that it would have ended differently. Maybe my wish is that she wouldn't have chosen Phoebus either, and they would have just all been friends.
Totally.
You know, like I don't necessarily think that it needed to end with Esmeralda being in love with Quasimodo, because I think the other theme, like that in with that theme of love that we were talking about earlier, there's also that unrequited love that I think is a lot of people can relate to, right? Like where he's kind of like pining after her, and he even says to his gargoyle friends like, oh, she'll never go for a guy like me, something like that. And then they have that whole song where they're like, she's just as in love with you as you are with her, which is we'll talk about that.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in the bonus thing, because there's like I still don't know, there's like a term for what his friends are doing, like overly hyping him up with no evidence that like this is true. But anyway, that's beside the point.
And that I think makes it especially heartbreaking. Not that she like denies it, there is no explicit like he goes for it, she says no, and then whatever, but there is that like he sees Phoebus and Esmeralda together, and then his heart is broken, and it's very clear. And that I think is something that a lot of people can empathize with, like unrequited love. But I think that if you're gonna hammer that in as a stereotype, there needs to be something that undoes it as well. And there was no undoing of that, in my opinion. Unless it's like unless they're like, we're going for platonic love here. I don't know.
No, I hear you. And I think, my thought isn't gonna like undo it, but I do like how once he sees Esmeralda and Phoebus together, he doesn't try to chase. I think that's another thing we see in media, where the protagonist or whatever will chase or try to convince their love interest that they need to love them, or that they're good enough to be loved by them or whatever. And so I think I do like how once he sees that they are together, he kind of backs off in a way, because he just wants Esmeralda to be happy
Yeah.
He's so sweet.
Yeah. He never
Yeah.
does what we explicitly see Frollo do, where he pins responsibility for his feelings on Esmeralda.
Yes, right.
Quasimodo's just like, I'm sad and I'm going to deal with this. We got bigger things to deal with. Whereas Frollo
Yeah.
starts a genocide about his lack of responsibility.
And I think that's why I like the three main
Correct.
characters, because they are never like, you are responsible for my feelings. You are responsible for my happiness and my safety. They're all very like self empowered, self-reliant people who out of
Mhm.
the kindness of their own heart are willing and able to help others. And I think that's really beautiful. But
Yeah.
HB,
Yeah,
just
I
to kind of
agree.
validate what you were saying, I'm with you. This is like the one Disney movie where I kind of wish there wasn't a love any kind of love thing. Like, I don't think Esmeralda and Phoebus needed to become a couple. The kiss felt forced. That whole like romantic relationship just felt really weird. And I would have much rather that they were just like buddies. But that by the end they just all stood on the roof, arm in arm, and
Yeah.
watched the sunset together,
All three of them. I think
Yeah.
that would have been beautiful. I think
That
that
would
would
have
have
been
been
so cute.
beautiful.
Or they become a throuple. Those are my two options.
Yes. Again,
Those
the
are good too.
polycule of Notre Dame. It's happening.
Love it. I love it.
But yeah, going back to like the three of them saving each other, just in terms of like looking at this through the lens of fitness, I just love how everyone is depicted as so strong, especially Quasimodo, because you often see people who have physical disabilities, they're not always depicted in media as being strong. Whereas because Quasimodo is literally like the bell ringer of Notre Dame, and Abelle, you brought up earlier about him like having these like Tarzan sort of like sliding down the side of the building and swinging from ropes and like all of that kind of stuff. Like he's very physically capable, which is amazing. And I think is like important to see in a character who looks like him. And that goes for Esmeralda as well. We've talked about all of the things that she's done throughout this. Phoebus is like, he's supposed to be strong, so I guess like it's not as impressive, but it's also nice to see like, I just think it's really cool. I think it's really cool to see like three very strong and in different ways. Like they're all strong in different ways. And I'll say one of my favorite quotes now, which is when Quasimodo's been chained to the cathedral because Frollo is about to burn Esmeralda at the stake like a freaking witch. The gargoyle, one of the gargoyle friends says, "These chains aren't what's holding you back." And I love that because it's like, it's mental. You're holding yourself back. And I think that that is something that resonates with me as a fitness professional, because sometimes we just like, we are stronger than we think we are, whether that is mentally, physically, whatever you think that you're capable of. I think that there's a way to recognize how much more capable you are. Right. And I loved that moment because it's like, not only is he physically chained, but the notion that like the chains aren't actually what is keeping him from breaking free. It is himself. He's holding himself back. And because of the thoughts that Frollo has put in his head, that he's not strong enough, he's not capable, he can't do this. Once he breaks out of that mindset, he's able to break free of the chains and save Esmeralda. So I love that as a sort of metaphor for like whatever it is that you're going through, whatever you feel like, is holding you down. Whose voice are you hearing in your head that's telling you you're not capable? Whose voice is that that's saying like, you're not smart enough, you're not strong enough, you're not this enough, you're not that enough? Like, how can you break free of those chains for yourself to move forward?
Yeah. I I mean, you touched on the mindset stuff. I kind of had some notes about that too, that sometimes it's just easier for us to find evidence to support those limiting beliefs, even if they're not actually correct or true, because our brain, like I mentioned in the Rapunzel episode, our brain gravitates toward what fits those narratives, because the unknown or something different is not as easily accepted because it doesn't fit. And so unlearning that takes time and new experiences to disrupt and change and unlearn those. And something I talk about with my clients is like a ladder analogy, which essentially is just like, what is the thing you want, whether it's a goal, a mindset, to undo a belief or to accept a new belief. Put that at the top of the ladder. And then what is the first step, or what is the first rung that you can take? Like, what can you believe right now? Because it maybe at the very top is the belief that, like, I am good enough, I am worthy of love, I am deserving of good things, right? But that doesn't feel easy to believe right now, and like it goes against every fiber of your being. That's fine, that's so understandable. And I think on social media, especially when we talk about healing and mindset and things like that, it's just like you go from 0 to 100, you just like whoop, 180, boom, you're your highest self or whatever. And we don't take into account our nervous system, first of all, the psychology behind all of that, things like that. So my question is always like, if that is your goal, if that is the belief that you want to adopt, what is the first step, and what can you believe right now? And maybe it's just that I've gone through a lot of stuff, I'm here, I have, a body, I have, just like what can you believe that feels empowering, even if it's quote unquote small? And I always like to remind people that, like, there is no big or small win or goal. It's just, if that is the first step, great. That's amazing. I would prefer you take quote unquote smaller steps than try to jump to this thing that might feel believable for just a second. But because we didn't set the framework and the foundation, it's not sustainable. And we go, it's, not go back, because I don't really think we regress, but then we just readopt that old belief because it has a stronger hold on us.
Mhm.
And then also, like, talking about nervous system regulation, when we are activated or when we are triggered, the chemical wash that happens in us, and like the thoughts and the beliefs and whatever that come up, happens in milliseconds. So there isn't time to like think our way out of it. And so I think it's important, just like when we're learning how to, I kind of equate it to like learning how to swim. You don't learn how to swim in the middle of a hurricane, right? You do it in calm waters. And similarly, when we are navigating activations and triggers, it's really important that we do it when we feel safe and regulated to do so, whether that be breath work or grounding techniques, or, I know a lot of like CBT, DBT exercises get frowned upon in some cases, but sometimes they are helpful. All of that to say, those were my thoughts or notes that came up when watching this movie, because I think it ends on a very positive note, but I would love to see something like post all of this. Like we talked about Rapunzel, she has her own animated series, and they kind of go into that with like her flashbacks and the triggers and trauma that comes up for her. But I don't know about Quasimodo. So I think when we're equating this movie to a healing journey, there isn't like much I can parallel with the movie as it is, but I think post all of that, I have some notes and thoughts and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like this movie is Quasimodo like doing the work to break free of the initial trauma and his initial ways of thinking, and like the recovery is after the movie. This is him like literally breaking the chains in some cases to begin his healing journey.
Exactly. Yes. That's very good. That's a very good point. Abelle, do you have a favorite quote from the movie?
I think really like I still get chills when I listen to Esmeralda's song. And I love literally just like that whole song is so beautiful, but I really love the very end of it where she says, I thought we all were the children of God. Because I think like the core message of the movie, and like whatever your religious or not religious beliefs are, like whatever else you believe, like we are all people. We are all the same in some capacity. Like we should be caring for each other because of that. We shouldn't be hating each other because of whatever differences. We are all in the same boat here. Let's look out for and care for everybody else around us. And I just think that's such a positive and such a moving sentiment.
Do you have a favorite character?
Aside from Esmeralda, I really enjoy the gargoyles. They're all very funny. We actually didn't talk about them much, but I mean, they're the comic relief there. And I also, because I always love a good animal companion, I love Esmeralda's goat, Jolly. I remembered I had a stuffed animal of that character when the movie came out. I remembered that. Yes. Yeah, I love the little goat.
Yeah, he's my favorite character for that reason. He's so sassy. I remember we were watching the movie, and I don't remember the exact scene, but I think Quasimodo reveals his face, and I know this isn't funny, but the movie made it kind of funny. Quasimodo reveals his face, and the goat immediately goes, "Bleh."
Yeah, it's that sound that he makes is what's funny. He actually, comparing this movie Entangled, Jolly the goat actually functions very similar to Pascal the chameleon in just like
Totally.
being the non-verbal observer who's like, what is happening right now?
Totally. Yeah. HB, who's your favorite character other than Esmeralda?
Other than Esmeralda, I guess I would say it is Quasimodo. Yeah, I think he's just a little sweetie pie, and he deserves everything in the whole wide world.
Protect him at all costs. Yeah. Before we wrap up, Abelle, I know you love animation and you love the way it's used for storytelling and things like that. Do you have any notes on the animation in this movie?
Yeah, so they actually, when this movie was made, there's so many crowd scenes that are in this movie. Like anytime you see like the front of the cathedral and you see like the hordes of people there for the festival, or at the end when everything's going down, instead of like taking the ungodly amount of time it would have taken to animate every single one of those people like by hand, like they did for the main animation, they actually invented a whole new software that I think is actually just called Crowd, where they made um, three versions of a male and female model and just changed the body size and made it so they could swap out like the color of their clothing or their hair, and gave them like a little basically to-do list of different bodily movements they could do, and then just program them and let them go. So usually if you actually look at the crowd scenes, you can see like the main action that's happening, and like the characters immediately around that are all 2D animated. But if you look at the people behind them, the bigger the crowd scene is especially, you can see that everyone else looks the same, just with different coloring, and is like a little, they're not animated. You can tell they look like PlayStation 2 graphics or something in the background. And also, since the Disney animators like to do a lot of little like Easter eggs in the movies, in the very beginning of the movie, when there's like the sweeping view over the city as the story begins, you can see Belle from Beauty and the Beast walking around in the bottom somewhere.
Yeah,
I missed that.
She's just like in the corner reading her book with her little basket as she's walking by in her little blue and white peasant dress.
Oh, that's cool. Sometimes we have a little segment on this podcast of just like info dump. So if you will allow me, I haven't finished reading Hunchback of Notre Dame. I have it. I read it. I started reading it years ago. Victor Hugo is just not my kind of author, I am realizing. I don't need a 3-page backstory on a donkey. Thank you very much. So
too much information, sir.
Yeah. Thank you, internet. So I was interested to know like the differences between the book and the movie. So the main ones that I pulled, there's a whole list, and we'll link that in the show notes. But so like you mentioned, Frollo is an archdeacon in the book, not a judge. Like, could you imagine though if they had kept him as a priest in this movie? Like,
yeah, no, whole extra layer of
yeah.
We've talked about how Phoebus is a very stand-up guy in the movie. He is not in the book. He's actually a piece of garbage. That's fun. Quasimodo also isn't the main character in the book. It's someone else. I have no idea how to say his name. It sounds French, but Quasimodo is more of like so basically the main character is like someone Victor Hugo supplanted in the book to act as like him, and so he's like an author and a poet, and he like gets mixed up in this storyline, and so technically he's the main character, but he tells the story of Quasimodo, Esmeralda, and Phoebus and Frollo and all of everyone else. Yeah. And then sadly in the book, pretty much everyone dies, but Esmeralda dies, and it's really sad.
And doesn't Quasimodo also die?
They pretty much all die. I think except for Phoebus.
Oh, good.
But I mean, he doesn't get a happy ending. But anyway, so
I've also heard that the book is even like more horrifically racist than
Probably.
I tried to read it. I tried to read the book in French, because I was taking French in Europe at the time. Like I was studying abroad in Luxembourg,
Ooh.
and our it was history or literature. I can't remember which class I was taking, but the professor was encouraging us to read a book in French. And so I went in Paris. I bought The Hunchback of Notre Dame from the Shakespeare bookshop in Paris. And I thought it was just so very cool of me to do. And then I tried to read it in French and I was like, I don't know what it is. I was like, I can't do this. I gave up very quickly.
Oh my gosh, how funny. So I think we touched on a lot of great things. Abelle, I just want to thank you because I came into this kind of not loving the movie and I was ready to just kind of like hate on it, and really all of my notes, like all of my positive notes were about Esmeralda, but I just want to thank you for giving us a different perspective and insight, because now instead of like loathing and despising the movie, I actually kind of like it. Not going to rewatch it, but now I'm not going to
That's
be
fair.
like stuck.
There you go.
Who,
Yeah, thanks
who
for having
knows
me.
where this Oh, sorry. I was going to say, who knows
There
where
you-
this episode would have gone had you not been a guest.
Yeah, it's funny, and like I said, I'd never really sat and thought about why I like this movie so much until this week, like a few days ago. So it was nice to actually sit down and think, why do I like this? Oh no, I understand. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being here, for your time and energy. I don't know if you have any public socials or anything that you're doing you'd like to let listeners know about.
Probably the only place now you can find me. I got rid of my Facebook a few years ago, which is actually one of the best things I have ever done for my mental health. Just
Mhm.
but I do still have a Twitter at Boopabelle, BOOPABELLE. It's really just my nerd out space. Sometimes I post art and whatnot. Mostly it's me freaking out about video games. But yeah, feel free to find me there.
Love it. Yay. HB, anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up?
No, I think we are all good.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining this episode. And if you have any thoughts, questions, or any points that we did not finish, because that happens, you're welcome to email us at mhm.thepodcast@gmail.com. Thanks, everybody. And we'll talk again soon.
Bye. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Mental Health Multiverse podcast and for spending time with us, HB and LB. Special shout out to our musical composer, Little HB.
If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, feel free to share it with others, post about it on social media, leave a rating and review, or become an exclusive Patreon member to see bonus and additional content.
To stay up to date on all things MHM, you can follow us on Instagram at Heather Bodie and at littlebin_notbroken, or subscribe to our YouTube channel to see our faces and watch some fun bloopers. You can find all of these links in the show notes.
Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.